Hi, good afternoon. My name is Valentina Dugan and my group members are Antonia Luisa Valeta and Maria Clara Barragan. Our topic is pollution and capitalism. So this is our poem. It's titled by Nature's Law. The waves are rolling towards the shore, a silent world, an empty core, lifeless and with nothing more. The waves are crashing on the shore. The fabulous beast, a mighty roar, extinction men choose to ignore, and the waves are breaking at the shore. A new beginning, our feathers for humans nurture, forced to explore. Our waves are leaping and at the shore. Seven seas sailed, in the skies we soar. Kingdoms are concord blood in their pour, crimson's wave rests on the shore. A fractured earth relations soar, a grid that breaks on nature core. And the waves are turning on the shore. Gluton's rage, we lust for more, and the waves are monster on the shore. The tides are turning, the land is raw, and the face of nature's law. And the waves are rolling toward the shore, and the waves are rolling toward the shore, and the waves are rolling toward the shore. Forevermore, anonyms. So, our abstract basis in the next thing. So, this presentation has the three main objectives. Firstly, for our audience, to understand the roots of the climate crisis we are currently living. Secondly, to be able to connect the climate crisis to the irresponsible way in which we have been approaching capitalism. And lastly, we would like to our audience to consider their personal contribution to the climate crisis and reflect upon the habits. Our first objective will be accomplished by explaining the climate crisis through its evidence, cause and effects. Our second objective by relating the crisis to irresponsible capitalism through the clear and actual examples. Finally, our last objectives will be accomplished by providing our audience with viable solutions for diverse harmful habits. Okay. ¿Quieres pararlo? Our presentation bases in the following question. In what ways has unrestrained capitalism caused the climate crisis, and how can controlled capitalism reverse the damage done?
We have two objectives for our audience to understand. The first one is, what should I do as a global citizen to help reduce climate change and its effects? And the second one is that the audience will understand climate change and how capitalism affects it. First, we're going to talk about environmental crisis. Environmental crises are basically a bunch of processes that has been accelerating because of human intervention. People think that the only environmental problems right now are global warming and climate change, but they are not. There is other environmental problems that we are going to talk about that are part of the environmental crisis. So we have air pollution, water pollution, and soil pollution. Air pollution is caused by gases and toxins thrown away in the industries and the factories, and it is causing another environmental problem that is public health problems because it is affecting people's breathing. Also, we have water pollution. Water pollution is caused by oil spills, acid rain, and plastic. And we have soil pollution. It is caused basically by industrial waste that takes away essential nutrients from soil. Then we have overpopulation. Overpopulation is an environmental problem because the more people they are. We have a graph that explains how has CO2 evolved through the years. You can see that in the year 2000, it is start to grow faster. So we have a problem because we are not making anything about it, we are making it worse. Think about the consequences we are going to have if we don't do anything about the environmental crisis. the temperature is going to rise. The oceans are going to fill with plastic, and the animals are not going to be able to live there anymore. The air is going to be worse and worse, and there are going to be more extinct animals. For example, the koala is almost extinct. There is a few koalas, but if we don't do anything about it, they will not be koalas in the future.
So, how is the issue best explained? I'm going to talk about the three main factors, which are the evidence, the causes, and the effects. So we start with evidence. I'm going to talk about global temperature rise. So the planet average surface temperature has risen about 1.62 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 19th century, a change driven largely by increased carbon dioxide and other human-made emissions into the atmospheres. So here we can see a graph on how in 1911 was the global temperature and how it was until 2014. We can't imagine how it's actually now. And a fact is that not only was 2016 the warmest year on record, but 8 of the 12 months that take up the year were the warmest of record for those respective months. Okay, next is the warming ocean. That is another problem we can see in the planet. The oceans have absorbed much of this increased heat with the top of 700 meters of ocean showing warming of more than 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1969. Okay, now in this part we're gonna talk about shrinking ice sheets, glacial retreat, and decreased snow cover. So the shrinking ice sheets is the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets have decreased in mass. And glacial retreat are that glaciers are retreating almost everywhere around the world, including in the Alps, Himalaya, Andes, Rocky, Alaska, and Africa. And finally, decreased snow cover. That is the density of observation revealed to the amount of spring snow covering the northern hemisphere and decreased over the past 5 decades. So now talking about the sea, so we're gonna talk about sea level rise, declining Arctic sea ice, and ocean acidification. Wait. Okay, no, actually, in this part, we can see that how the ice is now and actually how it was in 1985. So we can see how it's actually melting. So now, yeah, talking about the seas, the sea level rise, global sea level rose about 8 inches in the last century. Declining Arctic sea ice, both of extent and thickness of Arctic sea ice has declined rapidly over the last several decades, sorry. And ocean acidification, that is since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where we can see humans involved, the acidity of surface ocean waters are increased about 30%. And all of this is thanks to the human ocean acidification. What happens is that thanks to humans, they are emitting a lot of carbon dioxide, and that's what's causing the ocean acidification. Okay, now we're gonna talk about the causes. What is all of this happening? So, first of all, we can see the greenhouse effect, which we know is a natural process that warms the Earth's surface. When the sun's energy reaches the Earth's atmosphere, some of it is reflected back to the space, and the rest of it is abstract and re-radiated by greenhouse gases. So we can see here the image where the sun is actually entering into the atmosphere and then going to the Earth. And it's supposed to happen is that the gases needs to go out. But what's happening with all the climate change is that the gases can't go out. So that's what climate change is happening. So now we're gonna talk about the solar radiance, which how we already talked about. It's about the heat that's coming into the Earth. So in this graph, what we're going to see it's we're going to compare the global surface temperature changes, which is the red line, and the sun's energy that Earth receives, which is the yellow line, in watts per square meter since 1880. The lighter, thinner lines how the yearly levels, while the heavier, thicker lines show the 11-year average trends. 11 years average are used to reduce the year-to-year natural noise in the data, making the underlying trends more obviously. And this, and this we can see too the role of human activity. So what are we doing and how are we causing all of this? So these bases basically, firstly in the industrial activities. So the industrial activities that our modern civilization depends upon have raised atmospheric carbon dioxide levels from 280 parts per million to 412 parts per million. In the last 150 years, the Pearl also concluded that there is a better than 95% probability that human produced greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide have convinced much of the observed increase in Earth temperature over the past 50 years. So here's how can you see all the causes I have mentioned and all the evidence I mentioned is happening because of human acts. And finally, the combustion of fossil fuels, which is such as a coal, oil, and natural gas, are created when organic matter decays and becomes compressed beneath larger open layer and sand, earth, rock, and ocean. Burning fossil fuels yields carbon dioxide, water, and energy. The process of burning fossil is known as combustion. So we know with this how it's affecting the earth. Finally, I'm going to talk about the effects that how humans are living a path of trash and of problems for climate change. So we can notice the temperature will continue to rise. So these are effects that are gonna happen if we don't take action. So frost-free season will length, changes in precipitation patterns, more drought and heat waves, hurricanes will become bigger and more intense. So because of things we are actually doing to the planet are going to affect to nature and to us too. Sea level will rise 1 to 4 feet by 2100, and Arctic likely to become ice free. So we're going to have no nature, we're going to get very low in ecosystems. So like living in Colombia, you can imagine that this is a place that is rich of ecosystems. But if we don't take act, how we're going to explain how in the rest of the presentation we're going to have these problems and we're going to lose our home, the earth.
Now we're going to talk about the key elements of our question. We have two key elements: capitalism and environmental crisis. We already talked about environmental crisis, so now we're going to talk about capitalism. Capitalism, by definition, is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners and profit rather than by the state. So here is an example on how capitalism works. So there is a person that has money, that has capital. He used that money to buy a factory and to pay workers when he has a factory. And workers, he can produce something and sell it. So he produces more money. And it goes again to a capital to produce, to pay more workers and improve the factory to gain more money. What is the relationship between capitalism and the environmental crisis? People often blame the environmental crisis on capitalism, but we think the cause of the environmental crisis is not capitalism, but irresponsible capitalism. But capitalism, irresponsible capitalism, has contributed to the environmental crisis because capitalism caused consumerism, and consumerism produce more pollution, more trash, and more pollutants. Because the more you sell, the more money you gain. So, industries, factories promote people to buy things, to have a lot of things to consume a lot. So they end up in consumerism, and that is one of the causes in the environmental crisis.
Next, we're going to talk about how this issue could have been avoided and what must be done now in order to reverse the damage done. So this part of our presentation is going to go around responsibility, our responsibility as global citizens, and the big industry's responsibility, and the necessity of responsible energy and primary sources, responsible production, distribution, and consumption. About responsible energy sources, what happens nowadays is that the biggest energy source that we use all around the world is the combustion of fossil fuels. But this is also the most harmful type of energy source for our environment. So we're going to talk about 4 alternative energy sources that could be used as a substitution for the combustion of fossil fuels. First, we have solar energy. This energy is taken from the sun. It converts the electromagnetic energy of the sun rays that hit the earth through photoelectric cells or solar collectors, which are these big rectangular blue solar panels we all know. And what they do is convert the electromagnetic radiation of the sun into electric energy or thermic energy, and this can be used as a substitution for the combustion of fossil fuels. The aeolic energy, this energy is taken from the kinetic energy of the wind and of the wind currents. This energy is collected with wind turbines, which come from windmills, and they look exactly like that, like this. And they convert the kinetic energy of the wind into mechanic energy, and that is then converted into electricity. This is a very economic energy source, so it would be very useful in isolated places where they don't have access to electricity. Then we have biomass. This energy source takes the chemical energy produced by plants through photosynthesis. It separates it from the organic material, and then it's useful energy. So what happens is that plants collect energy from the sun through photosynthesis, they transform it into chemical energy, and then plants turn into organic material. Then the chemical energy from plants can be separated from organic material and then used. This is a very cheap energy source, so it could be very useful in places with less resources that have no access to energy. Lastly, we have hydraulic energy. This energy takes the potential and kinetic energy from water courses. It transforms it into electric energy through hydraulic turbines. Next, we're going to talk about responsible primary sources. What happens nowadays is that big companies, for example in the food industry, such as McDonald's and Burger King and all the big companies we know, use big providers to get their primary products from, like fruits, vegetables, and meat. What happens with these big providers is that they need to cover a huge amount of demand, and they need to supply to huge amounts of product. So they feel the need to use fertilizers and pesticides that are harmful for our health and for the environment. What happens with small businesses is that since they don't have to cover such a huge demand, they don't feel the need to use pesticides or fertilizers that are harmful for us and for the environment. And the same happens, this is with agriculture and crops, but the same happens with the meat industry. Big providers of meat need to use, firstly, huge amounts of land to have, for example, cows, which is the most consumed type of meat nowadays. So they need huge amounts of land, which involves directly deforestation, and they also need to have a lot of cows. And what happens with the soil where cows live, since they're so heavy and there's so many cows together, when they step on the land, they compress the soil. And what happens when soil is compressed is that it becomes infertile. So it's never going to be able to produce anything else. So this causes huge amounts of land to be wasted. Instead, with small providers of meat, they use less land, they have less cows, so they do harm to a smaller amount of land, which can be then used to produce crops or anything else, and it doesn't involve so much deforestation. Also, what tends to happen with smaller businesses is that they tend to be more responsible with their use of other resources. When talking about responsible production, it's all about what it takes for a product to be produced, and it falls entirely in the hands of companies or producers. They need to find a more efficient management of their resources, including energy being almost the most important one, land, water, and waste, for example, food waste in the food industry. A more responsible use of energy is what we already talked about. Try to use sustainable energies such as solar, eolic, biomass, or hydraulic energy. A responsible use of land and water is what we talked about when we mentioned small businesses and providers. And what happens with waste is that sometimes products are organic or are harmless to our health or to the environment in itself, the product. What happens in the process might be different. It might be harmful. Some processes include plastic, and if companies don't find a way to make this plastic useful or at least prevent it from going into the ocean, they're still polluting. Or other processes include emissions of CO2. So if companies don't find a way to collect that CO2 or transform it into something else or prevent it from going into the air, they are still polluting even though their product might be harmless. When talking about product distribution or responsible product distribution, we're going to talk about two things. Firstly, marketing, and secondly, transportation. Marketing is super important because it's the way in which products get to their consumers. What tends to happen a lot nowadays and has been happening since products are sold is that sellers sell their product as if it was perfect or 100% harmful or as if you really needed it when you really don't. So a truthful marketing is very important, and it also falls in the hands of people who sell products. For example, something they could do is mark their GMO products. If you're selling something, or if a company is selling a product that contains genetically modified organisms, this should be informed to the consumer so people can take informed choices. If they don't want to consume genetically modified crops, then they can know which of them are genetically modified and don't buy them. But if they don't care, then they can buy them too. The importance of marketing is telling the truth so that people can take informed decisions. In the distribution of products, we are also going to talk about transportation, because what happens is that, for example, products that come from China or Germany or USA and are sold in Colombia, for example, have to take a huge trip from where they were produced to where they are being sold or where you are buying them. And this means huge emissions of CO2. So what companies can do is restrict their selling area, to say it some way. So for example, if a company that's selling some crops, some fruit or some vegetable, it restricts and it says we're only gonna sell a product from where it's produced to certain distance, then they're instantly reducing the CO2 emissions that their product means to the planet. This is about product transportation. Next, we have transportation not only of products but of individuals. This is also very important, and this is our responsibility as global citizens. We need to think twice before we transport ourselves. For example, if your workplace is 1 hour walking from your home and half an hour if you go by car, then you could sacrifice some of your time and go walking to work. If that's not an option and the distance is too far away from your house, then you could use your bicycle. If that's not an option either, there are always new alternatives. For example, public transportations. This might be a more viable solution in countries where the public transportation works better. Because in Colombia, it tends to be a little bit chaotic. But if it's an option for you to use public transportation, that would be a responsible choice. Because although buses do have an enormous amount of CO2 emissions, they are transporting lots of people. Instead, what happens with cars is that they also produce a lot of CO2 and they only transport from 1 to 4 persons. If public transportation is not an option for any reason, you can always share your car in order to make that CO2 emission that you're making from your car worth more than one person or 2 or 3. So transport as many people as you can in your car. Lastly, we're gonna finish about talking about our responsibility as global citizens. Apart from responsible transportation, which I just talked about, our main responsibility is to be intelligent and informed in the decisions we make before buying any product, if it's food or clothes or any electronic device, or before even traveling and before investing money on anything. We need to think twice. What are you financing with your money, and where that money that you're paying is going to? If it's going somewhere where they're being responsible about their use of energy, somewhere where they're using fertilizers or pesticides that are harmful to your health or to the environment. If the places you are financing with your money when you buy any product have an efficient management of their resources, these are all things we all need to think about before buying anything or financing any type of industry. And that's our main responsibility as global citizens, to be critical and to think twice before investing our money on anything.
Okay, so after this presentation, we can see that actually capitalism is affecting the climate crisis. So, what we can do as humans? We can, in these moments that we are in a quarantine, knowing that out there is a coronavirus, we can see some changes in the planet, in the world, in our home. So, we can do changes too. So, me, as a future ecologist, I would like you to tell you there are a lot of ways you can take care of the planet. Because maybe the government is not gonna take the best ways for we can actually take care of it. We need to save it. We need to take care of it. We only have one earth and it's our home. We need to take care of it. Okay, for closing, I'm very grateful for doing this presentation with Maria Clara and Antonia, because actually we like to spread what we have learned, because we don't want that this only stays in a presentation. We want that this continues for all other people and we can make changes. Remember, there's only one earth. We need to take care of it.